Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he walked through the thick forest outside New Haven Colony. The twin suns of Kepler 442c were setting, casting long shadows between the tall purple trees. He carried his mining scanner in one hand and a heavy pack on his back. This was his last survey of the week, and he was tired. The mining engineer had been working on this planet for 3 years now. New Haven was humanity's most distant colony, a small settlement of 200 people who came here to dig for rare metals. The work was hard and dangerous, but Jake loved being so far from Earth. Out here, a man could think clearly. A strange sound made him stop walking. It was soft like a whimper. Jake looked around the forest floor, pushing aside the blue grass that grew everywhere on this world. The sound came again, weaker this time. What the hell? Jake muttered to himself. He followed the sound to a small clearing where a huge tree had fallen. The massive trunk was split open, creating a dark cave underneath. The whimpering was coming. From inside that cave, Jake pulled out his flashlight and shined it into the darkness. 2 bright green eyes stared back at him. Then he saw the rest of the creature. It was about the size of a large dog, but unlike any animal Jake had ever seen. The creature had 6 legs, each ending in sharp claws. Its body was covered in scales that seemed to change color in the light, shifting from dark blue to silver. Strange markings along its sides glowed with a soft blue light. The creature was clearly hurt. One of its back legs was twisted at a bad angle, and there was blood on its scales. It made the whimpering sound again and tried to move deeper into the cave. "Easy there, little guy," Jake said softly. He had always been good with animals back on Earth. "I'm not going to hurt you." The creature hissed and showed rows of sharp teeth. Even hurt and small, it looked dangerous. Jake could see why the colonists were always warned about the local wildlife, but something in those green eyes made Jake feel sorry for the animal. It was scared and in pain. Back home, he had rescued dozens of stray cats and dogs. This was different, but the feeling was the same. Jake slowly took off his pack and pulled out his emergency medical kit. He also grabbed a protein bar from his lunch. "You hungry?" he asked, breaking the bar into small pieces. He tossed a piece near the creature. It sniffed the food but didn't move toward it. Jake tossed another piece, this time closer to himself. The creature watched him carefully. After 10 minutes, the animal finally moved forward and grabbed the food with its mouth. Jake smiled. That was progress. That's it. Good boy, or girl. I can't really tell with you, can I? The creature ate the rest of the protein bar, keeping its eyes on Jake the whole time. When the food was gone, it made a softer sound, almost like a purr. Jake reached into his kit and pulled out a medical scanner. The device was meant for humans, but it could detect basic injuries in most living things. "Let me take a look at that leg," Jake said. The creature backed away when Jake moved closer. But when he held out another piece of food, it stayed still. Jake slowly ran the scanner over the injured leg. The results showed a broken bone, but not too badly. With the right care, it would heal. There were also signs of infection from several cuts on the creature's body. Jake looked at his watch. It would be dark soon, and the forest was full of things much more dangerous than this hurt animal. He had 2 choices: leave the creature here to probably die, or take it back to the colony. "The colony isn't going to like this," Jake said to himself. Commander Roy Fisher ran New Haven like a military base. He had strict rules about bringing unknown life forms into the settlement. The commander would probably order Jake to get rid of the creature immediately. But Jake couldn't just walk away. He had never been able to leave a hurt animal behind. "Okay, little guy, we're going to try something crazy here." Jake pulled a blanket from his pack and slowly wrapped it around the creature. It struggled at first, but Jake's gentle voice seemed to calm it down. "I know this is scary, but I'm going to help you, I promise." The walk back to New Haven took an hour. The creature was heavier than it looked, and Jake had to stop several times to rest. By the time he reached the colony's main gate, his back was killing him. The security guard, a young woman named Betty Ross, stared at the bundle in Jake's arms. "What the hell is that, Jake?" "Hurt animal I found in the forest," Jake said. "It needs medical attention. You know the rules about bringing things back from outside." "Come on, Betty, look at it. It's just a baby." The creature poked its head out of the blanket and looked at Betty with those big green eyes. She sighed. "Commander Fisher is going to kill you. Probably. But I'll deal with that tomorrow." Jake carried the creature to his small apartment in the colony's residential building. He lived alone in 2 rooms that weren't much to look at, but they were home. He set up a bed for the creature in the corner, using old blankets and pillows. Then he used his medical supplies to clean the cuts and set up a basic splint for the broken leg. The creature watched everything Jake did with intelligent eyes. It didn't fight when Jake treated its wounds, almost like it understood he was trying to help. "You're pretty smart, aren't you?" Jake said as he worked. "What should I call you?" The creature's scales shifted colors again, and the blue markings along its sides pulsed brighter. It reminded Jake of storm clouds lighting up with electricity. "Storm, that's a good name for you." When Jake finished treating the wounds, Storm curled up on the blanket bed and closed its eyes. Jake sat in his chair and watched the strange animal sleep. What had he gotten himself into? He didn't know anything about this creature's species. It could be dangerous when it got bigger. It might carry diseases that could hurt humans. Commander Fisher was going to be furious, but looking at Storm sleeping peacefully on the blankets, Jake felt like he had done the right thing. Every living creature deserved a chance to survive. His door chimed, and Jake's heart jumped. He opened it to find Lisa Parker, the colony's medical officer. She was also his closest friend on New Haven. "Betty told me you brought something back from the forest," Lisa said. She stepped into the apartment and saw Storm. "Oh my God, Jake, what is that thing? I found it hurt in the woods. I couldn't just leave it there." Lisa moved closer to get a better look. She was a good doctor and had treated strange injuries before. "It's actually kind of beautiful. But Jake, you know how dangerous the wildlife is here. It's just a baby. And it's hurt. Now it's hurt. What happens when it grows up? Some of the predators on this planet can tear through steel." Jake looked at Storm, still sleeping quietly. "I don't know. But I couldn't leave it to die." Lisa sighed. She knew Jake well enough to understand that arguing was useless. When he decided to help something, nothing could change his mind. "Let me examine it properly," she said, pulling out her medical scanner. "If we're going to do this crazy thing, we might as well do it right." As Lisa worked, Jake felt a strange sense of peace. Maybe this was a mistake, but it felt like the right kind of mistake. Something told him that finding Storm was going to change everything. 3 months had passed since Jake brought Storm home, and everything had changed. The small creature that once fit in his arms was now the size of a large wolf. Storm's broken leg had healed perfectly, and the cuts on his scales had disappeared. Without leaving any scars, Jake sat at his kitchen table, eating breakfast and watching Storm play with a metal ball. The creature had learned to use all 6 of his legs in amazing ways. He could run faster than any human, climb walls like a spider, and jump distances that seemed impossible. "Morning, Storm," Jake said, tossing a piece of his protein cake toward. The creature. Storm caught the food in his mouth without even looking. His green eyes never left Jake's face. Over the past months, those eyes had become less wild and more trusting. Now Storm followed Jake everywhere, like a loyal dog. But Storm was definitely not a dog. He was getting smarter every day. Jake had taught him simple commands like sit, stay, and come. But Storm seemed to understand much more than that. Sometimes Jake felt like the creature was trying to talk to him. The blue markings on Storm's sides had grown brighter as he got bigger. They pulsed in different patterns, especially when Storm was excited or upset. Jake had started to recognize some of the patterns. Fast pulses meant Storm was happy. Slow, steady pulses meant he was calm. No pulses at all meant something was wrong. Jake's door chimed, and Storm immediately moved to stand between Jake and the door. This had become their routine. Storm was very protective of Jake, though he had never shown aggression toward any of the colonists. "It's okay, boy," Jake sighed, opening the door. Lisa Parker stood outside, carrying her medical bag. She had been visiting regularly to check on Storm's health and to study the strange creature. "Good morning, you two," Lisa said, stepping inside. Storm approached her slowly, sniffing the air. After a moment, his scales shifted to a lighter blue color, and he rubbed against her leg like a giant cat. "He remembers you," Jake said, smiling. "He does that color change thing when he's happy to see someone." Lisa scratched behind Storm's head, being careful of the small spines that had grown there. "He's gotten so big. And look at these new markings." Storm now had silver lines running along his back, and his claws had grown longer and sharper. Despite his fearsome appearance, he was gentle with the humans. He seemed to understand that they were fragile compared to him. "Any word from the supply ship?" Jake asked. "Captain Ben Hayes contacted us yesterday. They'll be here in 2 days. And Jake, they're bringing someone special. Dr. Amy Clark is a xenobiologist from Earth. She studies alien life forms." Jake felt his stomach tighten. "Did you tell her about Storm?" "I had to. She's going to want to examine him." Storm seemed to sense Jake's worry. The creature moved closer and made a soft sound, almost like a purr. Jake scratched Storm's neck, and the creature's eyes closed in contentment. "He won't like being examined by a stranger," Jake said. "We'll figure it out. Dr. Clark might be able to tell us more about what Storm really is." Over the past months, Jake had wondered about Storm's origins. The creature was clearly intelligent, but he didn't match any of the local wildlife they had cataloged. His abilities seemed too advanced for a normal animal. Storm could hear sounds that humans couldn't detect. He could see in complete darkness. His scales could change color to match his surroundings, making him nearly invisible. Most amazing of all, Storm seemed to understand human emotions. When Jake was sad or worried, Storm would stay close and try to comfort him. 2 days later, the supply ship arrived. Jake watched from his apartment window as the large vessel landed at the colony's spaceport. His hands were shaking slightly. What if Dr. Clark decided that Storm was too dangerous to keep in the colony? Storm was lying on his favorite blanket, but Jake could see the tension in the creature's body. Storm always knew when Jake was upset. "It's going to be okay, boy," Jake said, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. An hour later, Lisa arrived. With a woman Jake didn't recognize. Dr. Amy Clark was younger than Jake had expected, maybe 30 years old, with short red hair and bright eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Mr. Morrison," Dr. Clark said, extending her hand. "I'm Amy Clark. Lisa has told me so much about your unusual friend." Jake shook her hand, noticing how her eyes immediately went to Storm. The creature had stood up and was watching the stranger carefully. His scales had shifted to a darker color, and the blue markings were pulsing slowly. "He's beautiful," Dr. Clark said softly. "May I come closer?" "Storm decides who gets close," Jake said. "Storm, this is Dr. Clark. She's here to help." Storm tilted his head, studying the new human. After a long moment, he took a few steps forward and sniffed the air on Dr. Clark. Then something amazing happened. Storm's scales shifted to a bright silver color, and he made a sound Jake had never heard before. It was almost musical, like a song. "Incredible," Dr. Clark whispered. "He's trying to communicate with me." Storm continued making the musical sounds, and his blue markings began pulsing in complex patterns. Dr. Clark pulled out a small recording device. "I've never seen anything like this," she said, recording everything. "The vocalizations are definitely structured, like language. And those bioluminescent patterns are too complex to be random." Jake felt proud watching Storm show off his abilities. But he also felt worried. The more special Storm appeared, the more likely it was that someone would want to take him away. Dr. Clark spent the next several hours examining Storm. The creature seemed to enjoy the attention, showing off by climbing the walls and changing his scale colors. When Dr. Clark tested his hearing, Storm responded to sounds so high-pitched that the equipment could barely detect them. "His neural development is extraordinary," Dr. Clark said, looking at her scanner readings. "His brain is much larger than it should be for his body size. And the complexity of his nervous system is unlike anything I've seen." "What does that mean?" Jake asked. "It means Storm is much more intelligent than we initially thought. Possibly more intelligent than most Earth animals, maybe as smart as some primates." Storm seemed to understand they were talking about him. He moved to sit beside Jake, leaning his large body against Jake's legs. Jake scratched behind the creature's head, and Storm made his purring sound. "There's something else," Dr. Clark said, looking at her notes. "His physiology suggests he's not from this planet. The bone density, the muscle structure, the way his organs are arranged, it's all wrong for a creature that evolved here." "What are you saying?" Lisa asked. "I think Storm's species came from somewhere else, maybe another planet entirely." Jake looked down at Storm, who was now dozing with his head on Jake's feet. "But how did he get here? That's the question, isn't it?" Dr. Clark said. "And more importantly, are there others like him?" That night, after Dr. Clark and Lisa had left, Jake sat with Storm in the quiet apartment. The creature was lying on his blanket, but his eyes were open, watching Jake. "What are you, boy?" Jake asked softly. "Where did you come from?" Storm made a soft sound and moved closer. He rested his large head on Jake's lap, looking up at him with those intelligent green eyes. Jake could see something in that gaze, something that seemed almost human. It was like Storm was trying to tell him something important. Jake had always felt a special connection with animals, but this was different. With Storm, it felt like they could understand each other without words. When Jake was happy, Storm seemed happy. When Jake was worried, Storm tried to comfort him. "Whatever you are, wherever you came from, you're family now," Jake said, stroking Storm's scales. "We'll figure the rest out together." Storm's blue markings pulsed gently, and he closed his eyes. But Jake stayed awake long into the night, wondering about the mysteries surrounding his strange companion and what the future might hold for both of them. 6 months later, Storm had grown into something that made even Jake nervous sometimes. The creature now stood almost 8 feet tall when he stretched to his full height. His wingspan, when he spread the membrane-like flaps between his arms, reached 12 feet across. Storm's claws could cut through metal, and his teeth were as sharp as knives. But despite his fearsome appearance, Storm remained gentle with Jake and the other colonists. He had become the colony's unofficial guardian, warning them when dangerous local predators came too. Close to New Haven, his ability to sense threats had saved several lives. Jake was walking through the colony's main street with Storm beside him when the alarm sirens began blaring. Red lights flashed from every building, and colonists started running toward the shelters. "What's happening?" Jake asked Betty Ross, who was running past them. "Military ships coming in fast," she shouted. "Back, big ones." Jake looked up at the sky and saw 3 massive warships descending through the clouds. They were larger than any ships he had ever seen, with weapons that could probably destroy the entire colony in minutes. Storm moved closer to Jake, his scales shifting to a dark, almost black color. The blue markings on his sides were pulsing rapidly, and he was making a low growling sound. Jake had never seen Storm this agitated. "Easy, boy," Jake said, placing his hand on Storm's neck. Let's get inside. They hurried to Jake's apartment, where they found Lisa already waiting with her emergency medical kit. Through the window, they could see the warships landing at the colony's spaceport. "Who are they?" Jake asked. "I don't know," Lisa said. "But Commander Fisher is about to find out." An hour later, Commander Roy Fisher's voice came over the colony's communication system. He sounded tense and worried. "All colonists report to the main hall for an emergency meeting. This is not a drill." Jake and Lisa walked to the meeting hall with Storm following close behind. Many of the colonists stared at the large creature, but by now they were used to seeing him around the colony. Storm had never hurt anyone, and his warnings about local dangers had earned him respect. The main hall was packed with worried colonists. Commander Fisher stood at the front of the room, flanked by several people Jake didn't recognize. They wore military uniforms that were fancier than anything he had seen before. "Colonists of New Haven," Commander Fisher began. "We have been visited by Admiral Grace Turner from Earth Defense Command, along with her scientific team. They are here to investigate reports of a dangerous alien creature being kept in our colony." Jake felt his blood run cold. Storm, sensing Jake's fear, pressed closer against him. Admiral Turner stepped forward. She was a tall woman with gray hair and hard eyes that seemed to see everything. When her gaze fell on Storm, her expression became even more serious. "Citizens," Admiral Turner said, "I am here because we have received reports that someone in this colony is harboring a potentially dangerous alien predator. This creature poses a significant threat to human safety and must be contained immediately." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Some colonists looked at Jake and Storm, while others seemed confused about what was happening. "The creature in question," Admiral Turner continued, "has grown to a size where it could easily kill multiple humans. Our xenobiologist, Dr. Nathan Brooks, has studied the available data and concluded that this species likely evolved as an apex predator on its homeworld." Dr. Brooks, a thin man with nervous eyes, stepped forward with a tablet in his hands. "Based on the creature's physical development and observed behaviors, I recommend immediate containment or termination. The risk to human life is simply too great." Jake stood up, his heart pounding. "Admiral, with respect, Storm has never hurt anyone. He's protected this colony more times than I can count." "Storm?" Admiral Turner's eyebrows rose. "You've named it." "He's not an it," Jake said firmly. "He's intelligent, loyal, and gentle. He's saved lives here." Dr. Brooks shook his head. "Mr. Morrison, you're experiencing a psychological phenomenon as the Stockholm Syndrome with an animal. The creature has manipulated you into believing it's harmless." Storm made a low sound, and his markings began pulsing in slow, steady patterns. Jake recognized this as Storm's way of trying to stay calm when he was upset. "Look at him," Jake said. "Does he look like he's manipulating anyone?" "He's scared because he doesn't understand what's happening." Admiral Turner studied Storm for a long moment. "The creature is indeed impressive. But Dr. Brooks is right about the danger. A creature of this size and capability cannot be allowed to roam freely among civilians." Colony President Helen Martinez, who had been quiet until now, stepped forward. "Admiral, Jake Morrison is one of our most trusted colonists. If he says the creature is safe, perhaps we should listen." "With respect, President Martinez, you are not qualified to make decisions about xenobiological threats. This creature must be contained." Jake felt panic rising in his chest. "Contained where? What does that mean?" "There's a secure facility on Earth where dangerous alien specimens are studied," Dr. Brooks said. "The creature would be well cared for." "You mean locked in a cage?" Jake said angrily. Storm seemed to sense the growing tension in the room. His scales began shifting colors rapidly, and the blue markings on his sides pulsed brighter. He stood up to his full height, making several colonists step back nervously. "See?" Dr. Brooks pointed at Storm. The creature is becoming agitated. This is exactly the kind of unpredictable behavior that makes it dangerous. He's agitated because everyone is shouting and treating him like a monster, Jake shot back. Storm, sit, calm. Storm immediately sat down and his scales returned to their normal blue color. The rapid pulsing of his markings slowed to a gentle rhythm. The demonstration of Storm's obedience impressed some of the colonists, but Admiral Turner remained unmoved. Trained behavior does not eliminate the fundamental danger, she said. Mr. Morrison, I understand your attachment to the creature, but I have a responsibility to protect human lives. Dr. Amy Clark, who had been studying Storm for months, raised her hand. Admiral, may I speak? You may, Dr. Clark. I've spent considerable time studying this creature. While it's true that he's physically capable of great harm, his behavior suggests a level of intelligence and emotional control that's remarkable. He's shown the ability to interface with our electronic systems, solve complex problems, and demonstrate what can only be described as empathy. Empathy? Dr. Brooks scoffed. It's an animal, is it? Dr. Clark challenged. His neural complexity rivals that of some sentient species. His communication patterns suggest a sophisticated language, and his bond with Mr. Morrison appears to be genuine emotional attachment, not manipulation. Admiral Turner looked thoughtful. Even if that's true, Dr. Clark, the creature's origins remain unknown. We don't know if there are others like it, or if it might pose a threat we haven't yet discovered. As if responding to the conversation, Storm made a series of musical sounds, the same kind Dr. Clark had recorded months earlier, but this time, the sounds were more complex, almost like a song. Every person in the room fell silent, listening to the beautiful and haunting melody. When Storm finished, he looked directly at Admiral Turner and made a softer sound, almost like a plea. He's trying to communicate with you, Jake said quietly. He understands what's happening. Admiral Turner stared at Storm for a long moment. Even if the creature is intelligent, that might make it more dangerous, not less. Intelligent predators are the most dangerous of all. Jake felt desperate. What if we compromise? What if Storm stays here, put under observation? You could station people here to monitor him. The risk is still too great, Dr. Brooks insisted. But Admiral Turner held up her hand. Actually, that might be workable. I could leave a small research team here to study the creature in its current environment. If it shows any signs of aggressive behavior, we would remove it immediately. Jake felt a surge of hope. You mean Storm can stay? For now. But understand, Mr. Morrison, this creature is now under military observation. Any incident, any sign of danger, and it will be removed. Are you willing to accept full responsibility for its behavior? Jake looked at Storm, who was watching the conversation with those intelligent green eyes. Yes, I accept full responsibility. Admiral Turner nodded. Very well. We'll establish a research station here. But I want daily reports on the creature's behavior. And Mr. Morrison, if anything goes wrong, the consequences will be severe. As the meeting ended and people began to leave, Jake sat down heavily in his chair. Storm moved to his side and rested his large head on Jake's shoulder, making comforting sounds. The crisis was over for now, but Jake knew their problems were just beginning. Storm was under constant watch, and any mistake could mean losing his closest friend forever. 2 weeks had passed since Admiral Turner's team arrived at New Haven. Jake had gotten used to having military researchers watching his every move with Storm. Dr. Nathan Brooks followed them around with his tablet, recording everything Storm did. The constant observation made both Jake and Storm nervous. Jake was feeding Storm his morning meal when the colony's alarm system suddenly activated. But this wasn't the usual warning siren. This was the deep, booming sound that meant only one thing. Massive ships were approaching from space. Storm dropped his food and ran to the window. His scales immediately turned dark, and the blue markings on his sides began pulsing frantically. Jake had never seen Storm so upset. "What's wrong, boy?" Jake asked, joining Storm at the window. The sky above New Haven was changing. Dark shadows were moving across the clouds, growing larger by the second. Then Jake saw them. Ships. Dozens of them. Each one was bigger than anything humans had ever built. The ships were beautiful and terrifying at the same time. They had smooth, curved surfaces that seemed to shift color like Storm's scales. Strange lights pulsed along their sides in patterns that reminded Jake of Storm's markings. Storm was making sounds Jake had never heard before. They were musical, but sad and desperate. It almost sounded like Storm was crying. Jake's communication device buzzed with an emergency message from Commander Fisher. "All colonists report to emergency shelters immediately. Unknown alien fleet has entered our system." But Jake couldn't move. He was staring at Storm, who was pressing against the window as if trying to get closer to the ships. The creature's whole body was shaking. "Storm, what is it? Do you know those ships?" The largest ship in the fleet began descending toward the colony. As it got closer, Jake could see that it was enormous, easily 10 times the size of Admiral Turner's largest warship. The hull was covered in the same kind of markings that decorated Storm's body. Admiral Turner's voice came over the colony's speakers. "This is Admiral Turner to the unknown fleet. You are entering human space without permission. Please identify yourselves and state your intentions." The response came immediately, broadcast on all frequencies in perfect English. "This is the Imperial Fleet of the Valkyrie Empire, under command of Empress Zarathiel. We seek the return of the sacred bondkeeper of House Zarathiel, which was taken from our territory 2 years ago." Jake felt his stomach drop. Sacred bondkeeper? He looked at Storm, who was now making those musical crying sounds even louder. "Admiral." Turner's voice was tense. "We have no knowledge of any stolen property belonging to your empire. Please explain what you're referring to." "Scan your settlement," came the alien voice. "You will find our sacred bondkeeper. Its psychic signature is unmistakable to our sensors." Jake's hands were shaking as he opened his communication device. "Admiral Turner, this is Jake Morrison. I think they're talking about Storm." There was a long pause before Admiral Turner responded. "Mr. Morrison, bring the creature to the main hall immediately. And Mr. Morrison, do not attempt to leave the colony." Jake looked at Storm, who had turned away from the window and was staring at him with those intelligent green eyes. For the first time since Jake had found him, Storm looked truly afraid. "It's going to be okay, boy," Jake said, though he didn't believe it himself. "We'll figure this out." The walk to the main hall was the longest of Jake's life. Storm stayed close beside him, but Jake could feel the tension in the creature's body. Other colonists stared as they passed, whispering among themselves about the alien fleet overhead. The main hall was packed with people, but everyone fell silent when Jake and Storm entered. Admiral Turner stood at the front of the room with Dr. Brooks and several other military officers. Their faces were grim. "Mr. Morrison," Admiral Turner said, "it appears your creature may be more significant than we realized." Before Jake could respond, a new voice filled the room. It came from speakers that hadn't been there before, somehow connected to the alien ships above. "Humans of this settlement," the voice said. It was female, with a musical quality that reminded Jake of Storm's sounds. "I am Empress Zarathiel of the Valkyrie Empire. You have in your possession our most sacred creature, the bondkeeper that disappeared during a ceremonial hunt 2 years ago." Jake felt everyone's eyes turn toward Storm. The creature had grown very still, and his markings were pulsing in slow, steady patterns. "Your Majesty," Admiral Turner said, speaking toward the ceiling, "we were unaware that this creature belonged to anyone. It was found injured and alone in our forest." "The bondkeeper did not belong to you," Empress Zarathiel's voice carried a note of anger. "It belongs to me. It is my companion, my other half. Without it, I am incomplete." Storm made a soft sound, almost like a whimper. Jake reached out to comfort him, but Dr. Brooks grabbed his arm. "Don't touch it," Dr. Brooks whispered. "We don't know what we're dealing with anymore." Jake shook off the doctor's hand and placed his palm on Storm's neck. The creature immediately relaxed, and the pulsing of his markings slowed. "Your Majesty," Jake said, speaking loudly so his voice would carry to the alien ships. "Storm was hurt when I found him. I've been taking care of him for almost a year. He's healthy and happy." There was a long silence before the Empress spoke again. "You dare to speak of my bondkeeper as if it were your pet? You have stolen the most precious thing in my empire." "I didn't steal anything," Jake said, his voice rising. "I saved his life." "Silence," Admiral Turner hissed at Jake. Then she spoke to the ceiling again. "Your Majesty, perhaps we can arrange a peaceful return of your bondkeeper. Surely we can resolve this diplomatically." "There is nothing to resolve," the Empress said coldly. "Return my companion immediately, or face the consequences." Storm suddenly stood up and walked toward the center of the room. He looked up at the ceiling and began making those musical sounds again. But this time, they were different. Sadder, more complex. It sounded like Storm was trying to explain something. The entire room fell silent as Storm continued his musical communication. Jake could see tears forming in some people's eyes at the beautiful, heartbreaking sounds. When Storm finished, there was another long silence from the alien ships. Then Empress Zarathiel spoke again, and her voice was different. Softer, more confused. "This is impossible," she said. "My bondkeeper shows the resonance patterns of dual bonding, but that cannot be. Bondkeepers can only bond with Valkyrie royalty." Dr. Amy Clark, who had been quietly studying her scanner readings, stepped forward. "Your Majesty, may I ask what you mean by dual bonding?" "Your creature shows the psychic signature of bonding with both myself and another being. But no bondkeeper has ever bonded with a non-Valkyrie before. Your species should not be capable of forming such connections." Jake felt something click. In his mind, "You mean Storm is bonded with both of us?" "Apparently so," the Empress said, and Jake could hear wonder in her voice. "This changes everything. Bondkeepers are sacred to our people. They choose their companions through psychic connection. If my bondkeeper has truly bonded with a human, then you are no longer simply a thief." Admiral Turner looked confused. "What does this mean, exactly?" "It means," Empress Zarathiel said slowly, "that we are dealing with something that has never happened before in the history of our empire. A bondkeeper with dual loyalty. This human has somehow formed a sacred connection that we believed was impossible." Storm moved back to Jake's side and pressed against him. Jake could feel the creature's tension easing slightly, but he was still clearly upset about something. "Your Majesty," Jake said carefully, "what happens now?" "Now," the Empress said, "I must meet this human who has somehow bonded with my most precious companion. Prepare a meeting space. I am coming down to your settlement." Admiral Turner looked terrified. "Your Majesty, surely that's not necessary. We can arrange to send the creature up to your ship." "You do not understand," Empress Zarathiel said firmly. "If this human has truly bonded with my bondkeeper, then he is no longer just a human. He is something that has never existed before, and I must see this miracle for myself." Jake looked down at Storm, who was staring back at him with those intelligent eyes. Whatever happened next, their lives were about to change forever. Jake had never been more nervous in his life. He stood in the colony's main hall, which had been hastily prepared for the most important meeting in human history. Storm sat beside him, unusually calm despite everything that was happening. Empress's ship had landed an hour ago. It was smaller than the massive warships, but still bigger than anything the humans had. The ship's surface gleamed like liquid metal, and strange symbols pulsed along its sides with the same rhythm as Storm's markings. "Admiral," Turner paced nervously near the entrance. "Remember, Mr. Morrison, let me do the talking. This could determine whether humanity goes to war with an empire that could destroy us." Jake nodded, but his attention was focused on Storm. The creature had been making soft musical sounds since the Empress's ship landed. His scales kept shifting between different shades of blue, and his markings pulsed in patterns Jake had never seen before. "Are you okay, boy?" Jake whispered. Storm looked up at him and made a gentle sound. Then he did something he had never done before. He reached out with one of his front claws and carefully touched Jake's hand. The touch was so gentle that Jake barely felt it, but somehow it filled him with calm. The hall's main doors opened, and everyone fell silent. 3 figures entered, unlike anything Jake had ever seen. The first 2 were clearly guards. They stood over 7 feet tall, with 4 arms each and skin that seemed to be made of living crystal. They wore elaborate armor that glowed with soft light. Between them walked Empress Zara. Thiel. Jake had expected someone frightening and alien, but the Empress was beautiful in a way that took his breath away. She was tall and graceful, with pale blue skin that seemed to glow from within. Her hair was long and silver, moving as if it were underwater. She wore robes that changed color as she walked, shifting through every shade of blue and green, but it was her eyes that made Jake's heart race. They were the same brilliant green as Storm's eyes. Storm stood up the moment he saw the Empress. His scales turned bright silver, and his markings began pulsing rapidly. He made a sound that was part joy and part sorrow, like someone seeing a beloved friend after a long separation. The Empress stopped walking when she saw Storm. For a moment, her composed expression cracked, and Jake saw pure emotion on her face. Love, relief, and something that might have been grief. "My beloved Keth-Ara," she said softly. The words were in her own language, but somehow Jake understood them. They meant heart song. Storm took a step toward the Empress, then stopped and looked back at Jake. The creature seemed torn, wanting to go to the Empress, but not wanting to leave Jake behind. "It's okay, Storm," Jake said quietly. "Go to her." But Storm didn't move. Instead, he made a complex series of musical sounds, looking back and forth between Jake and the Empress. Zara Thiel listened to Storm's sounds with growing amazement. When the creature finished, she looked at Jake with new interest. "Your Majesty," Admiral Turner said carefully, "we are honored by your presence. Perhaps we can discuss the return of your companion." The Empress ignored Admiral Turner completely. She walked slowly toward Jake and Storm, her green eyes never leaving Jake's face. "You," she said, speaking English with a musical accent, "are the human who bonded with my Keth-Ara. My name is Jake Morrison, Your Majesty, and yes, I guess I am." The Empress stopped a few feet away from them. Storm was still making soft sounds, and his markings were pulsing in gentle waves. "He tells me that you saved his life," the Empress said, "that you cared for him when he was hurt and alone. Is this true?" "Yes, Your Majesty. I found him injured in the forest. I couldn't just leave him there." The Empress studied Jake's face for a long moment. "My people believe that bond-keepers can only form sacred connections with Valkyrie Rolli. For 3,000 years, this has been our truth. Yet my Keth-Ara shows clear signs of bonding with you." "I don't understand what that means," Jake said honestly. "It means," the Empress said softly, "that you have done something that should be impossible. You have formed a psychic connection with a creature that is part of my very soul." Storm moved closer to Jake and made a questioning sound. The Empress answered in her own language, and Storm responded with more musical notes. "He asks if you must choose between us," the Empress translated. "I told him that I do not know." Jake felt his heart breaking. Your Majesty, I love Storm. He's been my closest friend for almost a year. But I understand that he belongs with you. I won't keep him if he wants to go home. The Empress's eyes widened with surprise. You would give up your bonded companion? Even though losing him would. 'Cause you great pain? If it's what's best for Storm, yes. Storm made a distressed sound and pressed against Jake's side. The creature's markings were pulsing rapidly, and his scales had turned a dark, unhappy color. He does not wish to choose, the Empress said, watching Storm carefully. And perhaps he should not have to. Admiral Turner stepped forward nervously. Your Majesty, what are you suggesting? The Empress was quiet for a long moment, studying both Jake and Storm. Finally, she spoke. In all our history, we have never encountered a species capable of forming bonds with our sacred creatures. Yet this human has done exactly that. Perhaps this is not an accident. Perhaps this is a sign. A sign of what? Dr. Amy Clark asked. That our two peoples are meant to be connected, the Empress said. My Kethara has shown us that humans possess something we never believed possible. The ability to form true emotional bonds across species. Storm suddenly moved to stand between Jake and the Empress. He looked at both of them and began making the most complex musical sounds Jake had ever heard. The song was beautiful and sad and hopeful all at the same time. When Storm finished, the Empress had tears in her green eyes. What did he say? Jake asked. He says that love should not be divided, but shared. He says that both of us are his family. And family should be together. Jake felt hope rising in his chest. Does that mean? It means, the Empress said, that I have a proposal. You, Jake Morrison, would become an honorary member of House Zarathiel. You would share guardianship of Kethara with me. In return, you would serve as an ambassador between our peoples. Admiral Turner looked shocked. Your Majesty, that's unprecedented. Yes, the Empress said with a smile. Just like a human bonding with a Velkari sacred creature. Sometimes the unprecedented becomes necessary. Jake looked down at Storm, who was watching him with those intelligent green eyes. What would that mean exactly? It would mean traveling between our worlds, learning our ways as we learn yours. It would mean helping both our peoples understand that we are not so different. And it would mean that Kethara never has to choose between the ones he loves. Storm made a happy sound and his scales turned bright gold, a color Jake had never seen before. The creature's markings pulsed with joy, and he rubbed against both Jake and the Empress. I accept, Jake said without hesitation. If Storm wants this, then I want it too. The Empress smiled, and for the first time, she looked truly happy. Then welcome to House Zarathiel, Ambassador Jake Morrison. Admiral Turner stepped forward. Your Majesty, this arrangement would also require approval from Earth's government. Of course, the Empress said. But I believe they will see the wisdom in an alliance between our peoples. Especially when they realize what humans are capable of. What do you mean? Jake asked. You bonded with a creature that should have been impossible for your species to connect with. This suggests that humans have a gift we have never encountered before. The ability to understand and connect with any form of life. In a galaxy full of different species, that gift is more valuable than any weapon. Storm made another happy sound and began playfully chasing his own tail, something Jake hadn't seen him do since he was small. The sight made everyone in the room smile. So what happens now? Jake asked. Now, the Empress said, we begin something new. A partnership between species, guided by the wisdom of a creature who refused to let love be divided. Jake looked around. The room had all the amazed faces, then down at Storm, who was still playing happily at their feet. A year ago, he had been a simple mining engineer. Now he was about to become humanity's first alien ambassador. But as he watched Storm playing, surrounded by both human and alien friends, Jake realized that the title didn't matter. What mattered was that they were all together, and that love had found a way to bridge the gap between the stars.